With the iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro being out for about a week or so now, Apple's really kept the same theme going over the past couple of years of putting a big emphasis on its camera systems. And while I've spent the last 7 years learning the art of photography and mastering both mirrorless and DSLR cameras alike, the camera that I've still taken the most photos with over that span is still none other than my iPhone. So today I'm going to give you a full rundown of how to set up your iPhone to take the best images possible from the settings, in-camera setup, along with a full editing walkthrough in Lightroom Mobile. And I just want to preface that even though I'll be using the new iPhone 16 Pro in today's video, as long as you have an iPhone that's came out within the last few years or so, anything from the 13 Pro and up, you still should be able to follow along and copy most of these settings and achieve similar results yourself. So with that being said, let's jump into our camera settings and get this started. All right, so we're in our settings now and we want to jump into the camera section. And first thing we want to go towards is our formats right here. So for some reason, whenever you get a new iPhone or you've never changed the Apple default settings, they like to keep their camera capture at high efficiency. It's probably just to save memory or whatnot, but we want to make sure that we get the best image quality possible out of our images. So we want to make sure you have that on most compatible. Right underneath here, photo mode, there's a 12 megapixel and 24. We want to use the highest megapixel count, so we're going to keep that at 24. Right underneath that, ProRAW and resolution control, you want to keep that turned on. And right below that, Pro Default, this is where you have a few settings for you to choose from. I like to keep mine at ProRAW Max up to 48 megapixels. I don't know how Apple does this, but I'm pretty sure this started last year where there's a 12 megapixel and 48 megapixel camera. Some people say that the 12 megapixels actually performs better in low light just because of course, the lower megapixel count. But for me personally, in my experience, I haven't seen a huge difference, and I don't really want to be thinking of what megapixels I'm at and jumping into my settings and always toggling back and forth. So I just keep it at ProRAW Max up to 48 megapixels, but this one's really up to you. On the ProRAW format, right below that, I want to make sure I have JPEG XL. Main difference is of course, the compression, what it says down here. I just want to make sure that I'm getting the best image quality possible, so I keep it at JPEG XL. Next, we want to jump into our preserve settings. And in case you've never used this before, this is honestly a huge hack for if you're shooting using an iPhone, just because what this does is it actually saves whatever settings or adjustments you've already made within the camera app onto your phone. So whenever you close the app and turn it back on in the future, it doesn't just reset and wipe all your settings. It keeps your settings just how it was as when you previously used it. So it just saves you that much time when you're out shooting and you don't want to just worry about your settings. So as you can see, I like to keep a lot of these turned on. So I like to keep the camera mode turned on. So this just keeps it at whatever mode you're already shooting on previously, video, photo, slow-mo, or whatever. Controls menu, I like to keep that turned on. I keep photographic style turned off. I mean, I don't even use photographic styles that much to begin with because I like to edit my images afterwards in Lightroom Mobile. I keep creative controls on. I keep depth control on, even though I don't shoot portrait mode that much. Macro control, I like that to keep that one turned on as well, just because I like to decide manually if I'm going to be using macro mode or not, and not have the phone let that decide for me. Exposure adjustment, I leave that on as well. I leave night mode on just because I like to keep my night mode turned off, just because I rarely use that too, so I don't want to always have to toggle that on and off. Portrait zoom, I leave that one turned off. And then action mode, that's more of a video feature that helps with stabilization, but I like to keep that turned on as well. ProRAW and resolution control, I like to keep that one turned on just because we set that earlier in our format section. And I like to also turn on my Apple ProRes settings to make sure that's saved. And same with live photo, I don't actually shoot live photo that much, so I like to keep that one turned on so that when if I turn it off in my camera app, I don't always have to toggle that on and off every single time. Right below here, we're going under our composition, you want to make sure that you have your grid and level turned on, and that really helps because for the grid you have your rule of thirds grid, so it really helps with your composition and framing. And your leveling really helps with your leveling, especially when you're using the ultra wide lens, just because it's such a wide field of view that sometimes it can be hard to, of course, level your image. So it's good to have that turned on to help out with that. Under photo capture, there's diffusion camera, and it looks like you can choose different focal lengths. You can have the standard zoom the main camera set to, but if you really turn that on and you see, you're not actually choosing between 24, 28, and 35 millimeters. It's really just a crop, and we don't want that. If we're gonna crop the image at all, we want to make sure we do that afterwards in the edit. So I have that turned on and just keep the standard camera at 24 millimeters. Right underneath that, you want to also make sure you actually have prioritized faster shooting turned off. And while having it turned on can be a convenience because, you know, you get to snap more photos and whatnot, but from my experience, this actually lowers the image quality of your photos because, interestingly enough, if you have this turned on and you're snapping a bunch of photos, the phone will try to write each image onto the phone faster. So of course it's going to lower the image quality while doing that. So I want to also make sure, lastly, I have lens correction turned on just to help out with any distortion, especially on the ultra wide lens. And lastly, I keep my macro control on as well. All right, so now we're actually in the camera app itself, and I'm going to show you guys what I do in here. So we're pretty much going to go from top to bottom, pretty much. So the first major thing I like to set in here, and I used to not even know about this, is the exposure meter in the top left. I used to, when I want to set my exposure, I just tap the screen wherever, and you see the sundial that's right here on the right. I used to just drag that up and down, and while that does do the trick and helps you adjust the exposure, the problem with that is it's not very accurate and it's hard to maintain a certain level of consistency every time in all your photos because you have to do it manually each time and you're not going to get it at the exact same spot. So the exposure meter is a lot better way of going about this. So if you click that right here, as you can see, this little dial comes out on the bottom and you can just either set this up or down wherever you please. I like to keep mine between either negative 0.3 or negative 0.7, just because I personally think in most scenarios, iPhones tend to overexpose the image. So I like to just leave mine at 0.3. Next thing is in the top right corner. As you can see, you see the RAW Max icon. Of course, you want to make sure you have that turned on just because, you know, you want to be shooting in Pro RAW Max. And we're going to come back in the middle right here at the very top. And you can bring this up, and this is where a lot of people tend to get tripped up because this is where the aspect ratio lies. And a lot of people tend to think, what aspect ratio should I shoot in, and does it really matter? And I'm here to tell you that it really doesn't, because you might be thinking you're getting an actual change in the aspect ratio or sensor or whatnot, but what you're really doing is just cropping in your photo. So most of the time I keep mine at just a standard 4:3 unless I'm shooting something specific like an Instagram story and I don't really want to waste time cropping or even think about it. I can just switch to 16:9 right here. But most of the time I just keep it at the standard 4:3. And if I want to crop, I'll just crop it later. Lastly, I want to just touch on if you look at the middle of the screen of where your actual frame is, in case you don't know, is that if you actually tap and hold, there's this icon that comes up that says AE/AF lock. So what this does, it helps you lock your autofocus so that if you're moving or whatnot, or whatever the scenario, it helps you lock your focus and you won't have to have the phone always adjust and switch up the autofocus on you, depending on the scenario you're in. Lastly, I just want to mention the focal lengths you see on the bottom right here. So these 4 numbers on the bottom are the focal lengths that you're able to shoot in for the 3 lenses in the back of the camera. The thing about these is, the most important thing you want to know is that you don't want to shoot anything outside of these standard focal lengths, essentially right here. So the 0.5, 1x, 2x, and then of course the 5x. The reasoning behind this is, unlike a actual zoom lens on, say, a mirrorless camera, when you're technically zooming in, not like this, or in the case of the new iPhone 16, you're using the new rocker button right here. What you're actually doing is you're actually just cropping in your image. You're not changing your actual focal length. So we don't want that because you're going to lose out on resolution. So best practice is to just stick to whatever focal length you want to shoot at, and then if you want to actually crop in, do it later in the edit. All right, so here we are inside Lightroom Mobile, and we have a iPhone photo imported right here that my buddy took of me up at Pico de Oro when I was in Madeira over this past summer. And First things first, if you guys have never used Lightroom Mobile before or don't really have a lot of experience in terms of photo editing, I linked below my Essentials preset pack, which contains 5 presets that will help you really jumpstart your learning into Lightroom Mobile editing, and will really give you a head start in terms of learning what certain settings do and why I've done certain things to adjust certain things in my photos. So if you're interested in that, it'll be linked down below in the description. But for today, we're going to edit this photo without any presets so that you can kind of see my workflow from start to finish. So first things first, right here, we want to just mess with the basic adjustments right here. I do kind of see that the black points are a little low, so I want to bump that up a little, bump up the shadows a little bit. The thing about iPhone photos is that I typically don't really like to do any crazy coloring to it because that's just my style. I like to keep things natural, but I like to make a lot of minor adjustments that will really add up in the end. So I think I'm gonna drop my highlights here. Maybe even bring down the contrast just a little bit. I think this photo is definitely a little contrasty, but it was shot at sunrise, so it's makes sense. So something like that. We can jump into our curves, add our 3 points, and add a simple S curve. And then right here on the left point, I like to bring my black point a little up once again to just add a bit of a fade, but I don't want it to be super drastic, so I keep it very subtle like that. Right there. I like how that looks. So afterwards, I'm just gonna jump into my color tab, and as far as the temperature, the temperature goes, I think the temperature of this shot is fine. So we're gonna jump into down here to our vibrance and saturation. I like to bump my vibrance and saturation up just a little bit, just to add a bit of color back to the shot. I think that definitely does a lot. So a little fun fact, if you want to see the progress you've made thus far in the edit, you can also just hold your photo and you can do a little before and after. So you should make that a good habit for whenever you're editing on Lightroom Mobile, just to see, the progress you've made up to a certain point. So I'm going to jump into our grading tab right here. And because the highlights are so orangey, because this was shot during sunrise, I think I'm just going to add some teal into the shadows. Add a little bit of color contrast right there. And kind of pinpoint the shade of teal I want, and then maybe more right here. And then I typically want to make sure I don't go above like 15 or whatnot, just so I don't make any crazy changes. So, and then in contrast, in my highlights and midtones, I'm gonna do the same thing, but then just go on the opposite side and enhance the orange in the highlights and midtones to really emphasize that sunrise pop. That might be there we go. Get it a little bit more on the orange side. So like how that looks. We can even jump into the color mix right here. So this is where you can tweak each color individually. So I think the main color I want to tweak here is, I think the oranges are a bit red. So like in the sun and even on my face a little bit. So you're going to jump in here and try to tweak the hue of the reds. I might even want to bring the reds and the orange is mainly what I'm looking at. Kind of want to try bring that more on the yellow end. that looks pretty good. Maybe bring up the luminance to really bring out that pop in the oranges. I think the yellows look pretty okay too, so I don't really need to mess with the yellows too much right here. And I kind of want to see if I can bring down the saturation of the clouds a little bit. So I'll see if really messing the blues or the magentas really does anything there. Not too much. I see that the hues of the blues kind of tweaks the sky a little bit, so I'm going to drag that over to the teal side a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to bring down the purple in the clouds because I don't really typically like a lot of purple in my shots. That's just my personal preference. So bring that down a little bit. Try and mess with the hues a little bit. Bring it more on the more on the blue side as opposed to the violet side. And then bump that luminance up a little bit too. And there you go. So again, hold the photo, do a little before and after. Liking the progress we made so far. Gonna come down to the effects tab, and this is where I like to add a bit of grain to my photos to kind of mimic that, I guess, film stock Fujifilm kind of look. So I like to just keep it between 40 or 50. I'm typically more on the 40 actually. And then roughness, I just bring the roughness down to about 30 or 40 as well. I like how that looks. I think we're also going to add just a tiny vignette just to really emphasize myself, the subject in this shot. I think that looks really cool actually. And then smooth that out a little bit. Increase the feather so we can smooth that out a little bit. And then finally in the texture, within the effects tab, we're just gonna bring down the clarity just a little bit, just to take out that really clinical digital look that I personally don't really like that comes out of a lot of digital cameras. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So also finally, the last thing I like to do on the very right side on the optics, I like to just turn on chromatic aberration. Yeah, there you have it. So we'll do this one more time. We're going to hold this image, and before, after, I think it looks honestly great. And that pretty much wraps up today's video. If you made it all the way to the end today, I greatly appreciate it. And I really hope that you guys were able to learn something from the settings and tips I gave and are able to implement it into your iPhone in order to take some amazing images yourself. So with that being said, if you're new around here, feel free to leave a subscribe and check out the other videos on this channel, as I always like to talk about photography and videography related content. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching and take it easy.